Okay, we're recording now. So the structure of this conversation, I'm hoping to be relatively organic. We have several folks in the room who received travel awards from the Veteran Studies Association to subsidize some of their attendance at the conference. I received one of these awards in 2022, and that was my first introduction to the group and some of these amazing connections I have now. So it really does facilitate growth of the organization and elevate the voices of new members, emerging scholars, and folks that might not be at the center of our organization now, but that we want to get to participate in our conversations and discourse. So I drafted some questions with the help of Danielle, our intern. John has some different spin on some of those as well and additions. And basically our goal is just to ask our travel awardees that are here today about their takeaways from the conference, major themes they have prepared or are preparing written reflections about their experience at the conference that we've started sharing through our social media and that we plan to share on our website as well if you'd like to read those takeaways. But here we wanted to create space for discussion and encourage you all, if you're not one of these travel awardees, to interject when you have an idea or question or comment. I'll be managing the chat. You can just come off mute and ask a question as the conversation allows, but we're really hoping this can just be an organic discourse about what we took away individually and personally for our future research and our goals, but also what we can collectively do as VSA in the future, our ideas about programming, conversations, and who we want in the room as we think about the future of this group and our discourse. So I'm going to pass it over to Dr. John Armenta, who's going to facilitate our conversation.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. I'm still getting used to the title. Thank you all for being here. This is a really nice turnout. Oftentimes these Zoom meetings are either just a couple people or way too many, but this is a great size. So I'm going to just really kick it off. Carrie had written some really nice questions, and what I'm going to do is kind of riff off of them. But before we get started, Carrie, should we identify the people that we've already called out that we're going to put on the spot first and have them introduce themselves, and then I can get started. Okay, so let's do that. I forgot to write down the.
Everybody's all over the place in the group, but I can kind of shout people out and then you all can.
Yes, please do, because I just realized I closed that window that had that list.
Okay, yeah. Samuel, do you want to start? You're at the top left of my screen and you have that awesome microphone, so.
Uh-oh. No sound.
Awesome microphone, but I guess have to be off mute. Yeah.
Yes, I do that frequently. I'm so used to unmuting myself with my mixer that I forget the Zoom has one too. Anyway, my name's Samuel Lewis. Interesting how I'm going to introduce this, because I guess I'm giving you guys an exclusive announcement or something. I was the host for the Service to Service podcast for Eastern Kentucky University for a while, but now I am going independent and stuff like that. Nothing, thank you to them for, everything like that. This isn't one of those situations, but I just decided it's time to go independent. So I'm going to announce to you guys, none of you steal this, because I don't know how someone didn't think of this title earlier, but I will be hosting the Veteran Studies podcast. Nobody thought of that name. I don't know how they didn't, but I'm taking it. So I've got someone working on album art right now. I'm essentially going to be publishing episode 0 within the next couple of weeks, and then I'm going to start reaching out to people and getting interviews, both people who I've interviewed before and people that, I met at this conference. So stay tuned.
Great. All right. Thank you. Now I do have the list. Okay. Ben, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Effinger. I am a third-year doctoral student at the University of La Verne, studying my doctorate in public administration. And my dissertation research is all about veterans in local government. So I'm actually looking at success factors for veterans in local government. I'm using LA County, my county, as a case study. And hopefully by publishing those results, other jurisdictions can use kind of that make and model to evaluate, if they're hitting the mark, trying to recruit veterans into state, county, city, local government, joint powers authorities. I was fortunate enough to receive one of the travel stipends. Thank you to VSA. And, it was really refreshing to find this tribe because, with veteran studies being interdisciplinary, we exist in all sorts of slices of academic discipline. And I was finding it very challenging in public administration to find other works that supported kind of what I'm doing. So some of the literature that I will be producing will fill gaps, large gaps in the literature in the public administration discipline. And I've already got a laundry list of things to look into after I publish this work. But just was super excited to find this group of individuals, find like-minded folks that are traveling the path, and just introduce the practitioner side of academic studies as well, because a lot of what we do is theory-based, and I love taking things out into the working world and like throwing them against the wall and seeing if they work. So I think it's a good mashup that we're starting to introduce, practitioner degrees along with the academic degrees, and really, spice up kind of the conversations we can have about how veterans show up in society.
Great, thank you. And Ben, I'm going to be sending you an email soon. I'm going to be up in LA next weekend. Maybe we can grab lunch. Okay, Carla, please.
Hi, I'm not sure what we're doing on introductions because I thought we were just giving name and location, but it seems like we're giving a lot more. I don't know. Hi, everyone. Carla Sejas. I'm in California at University of California, Merced. So middle of California, Central Valley, where all your fruits and vegetables come from. And I am a PhD candidate at University of California, Merced. I'm in the Department of Anthropology and Heritage Studies, and my research focuses on how public policy affects post 9/11 military families. And within that, I had a bill in the legislature last year, and I have a bill in the legislature this year to, for those who are familiar with the California college fee waiver, it amends, last year's bill helped the children of veteran dependents, and this year's bill helps the spouses. So would love to talk more about that, but my passion is public policy, and I also am a co-producer of the Yosemite Veterans and Educational Leadership Seminar that we have here at our campus. And so a colleague of mine and I created this program where what I kind of call it like TAPS 2.0, where we bring 20 vets to our campus. They don't have to be seeking education, but what we do is, for some of you have taken TAPS, when you take it and you learn about all the benefits in that state. But then if you move away, does that really benefit you? And so we teach those veterans here in California about their benefits here in California. So we have CalVet come and tell them about their benefits, and then we introduce them to their education. So if they want to come to our university, or we have the California State University system, employers, and so on and so forth. But each one of the entities that we invite, the employers and the educational representatives, are all veterans themselves. So they also give their veteran story. And we just happen to do that in Yosemite so that we can be with nature as well, since it's close to our campus. So I enjoy being a member of the Veteran Studies Association and want to learn more from you all.
Nice, thank you. And Steve, wrap us up, please, and then we'll get started with the some of these questions.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Wall. I was fortunate enough to get this travel grant, not only to attend the conference, but I was also able to defend my dissertation while I was in town, and then roll straight into Veteran Studies Scholarship, which I think was pretty cool, and I think most people don't get to do once they complete their dissertation and that entire process. My study was about veteran identity, and who decides that and how that's formulated by individuals and the implications, especially in my profession of social work.
Okay, great, thank you. And I really like that we have a range of academic, non-academic, professional and more research-based scholarships. So let's get into these. First, we want to talk about the general theme of the conference, which was changing tides in the Sea of Goodwill. So the Veterans Studies 2024 theme encouraged us to explore whether and how changes in society mark an inflection point regarding the treatment and experiences of veterans in the U.S. and abroad. How did the conversations and presentations you engaged with influence your take on the current state of the Sea of Goodwill for veterans? So play around with that metaphor a bit if you want, or talk, or get out of the metaphor if you don't like it, and just discuss more about what's going on now and how it has changed our historical understanding of the treatment of veterans. Would any of our panelists like to start off, or should I just do the Socratic thing and just put somebody on the spot?
I don't mind jumping in.
Thank you.
So I think I try to think of whether the Sea of Goodwill was the chicken or the egg, right? But I think there's it's hard to define this delineation of the way that we currently think of veterans. If we were just to go ask average people in this country what a veteran is, or how they conceptualize that, and why there is this Sea of Goodwill that exists, because I think it applies. I think we still have that Sea of Goodwill, but it also informs the way that we think about veterans. And currently, right, we see expansion after expansion of definition of who's eligible for VA benefits in particular, right? And there's even a broader expansion of who is a veteran, how we conceptualize that, why we justify that definition and the services provided to them in the nonprofits and foundations which are getting funds in order to deliver these services, right? So the application and the practice of veteran-centric stuff then influences the definition and our societal conceptions of it. So I think it's an important aspect of our conversation, but I do think that this is going to change. I mean, it changed after the Civil War and the way that World War I benefits rolled out, and then the way that World War II benefits were rolled out, the way that we've conceptualized recruiting and retention benefits, whether they're military or veteran. Those have changed over time, and that drives, especially with an all-volunteer force, that drives what we think of as veterans. In addition to, unlike in the past, we see a big wave of veterans and the benefits that go to them based on very structured and large-scale conflict. And we currently don't have that. However, we still have plenty of veterans, even though that population is shrinking. So yes, I think it's an important thing for us to continue to consider. But is that going to change in the future? If I were to guess, yes, but I have no idea what that would look like.
Great, thank you. And definitely want to put a pin in that idea that Steve mentioned about changing and expanding the definition of veterans. That's a subject for a couple minutes from now. But because Steve, you mentioned public policy, I want to turn it over to well, really either Carla or Ben, because that seems to be your guys' interest. Like, how are you two noticing either changes to public policy, new programs, or just are we kind of, I don't know, putting a new coat of paint on it?
Carla, if you don't mind, I'll take a stab at kind of some historical context, and then you can talk about how your research wraps around the family dynamic. So with my research, right, I started looking at the lineage of, veterans entering government service, right? And this dates all the way back to like Civil War times, right? Where they were creating programs for disabled soldiers to have gainful employment after they left military service. And it transitioned forward, to World War I, World War II. And then there were a lot of studies about post-World War II, when a lot of that population was diverting to private sector because manufacturing and industry was such a big thing at that point. what was the efficacy of bringing these veterans into government roles? And did it actually, slog down the machine? And like, just because you had all of these veterans employed doesn't necessarily mean that they have the knowledge, skills, and ability to be successful in those roles. And did it just add to the layers of bureaucracy and really just gum up the machine? So there was some give and take about that, in the literature that I was looking at. And then it kind of brings us to the current state of, this thank you for your service obligation that everybody has, right? And the stigmatization that surrounds veterans, in today's society. And, fast forward to, to what I'm looking at currently, right? Like stigmatization shows up in many different ways. It doesn't have to be in your face. It can be very, very unconscious bias type, approach to it. Even when I'm looking at hiring practices in local government, if there is a veterans preference component to hiring, right, that's going to put an asterisk next to an individual's name when they're on an eligibility roster for a job, which delineates them from their civilian counterparts. And then automatically, when that hiring manager looks at that list, they're going to see, okay, somebody was awarded veterans preference. And either that's going to trigger something in their mind, either an affinity if they have family members or have been associated to military members or have an understanding, or it could trigger that stigmatization, right? If their only view of military has been informed through the cultural obligation of being grateful for service and what shows up on the screen, right? Media, Hollywood, all of the hoorah bloodbath stuff, right? Like, so all of that kind of wraps into, the stigmatization aspect, and it can be a pro or a con, right? Because it can influence both ways. So seeing that kind of unfold itself in what I'm looking at, it's really interesting because it comes from a place of good nature, right? It was rooted back in, these folks have given an arm, a leg, whatever the case may be for service all the way back to post-Civil War. And it's evolved to today for the invisible wounds and still, finding places for these individuals to be productive with their knowledge, skills, and abilities post-service. But what does that look like when you still have that asterisk associated to you?
Okay, good. And Carla, you want to add to this with the work on veteran families?
Thanks, Ben, for the history, because I was just in a roundtable yesterday and was bringing this up, where I think that where veteran studies can really help in changing policy. I mean, there's a lot of aspects of it, but one thing is that I'm finding, like, just in my classroom, I can use that as my sample. When I introduce myself, at the beginning of the semester, I ask my students, are there any veterans or military affiliated in my class? And in 5 years, I've had one. And that was actually last semester. And it was a dependent of an active duty Air Force currently serving. So my students are intrigued and they start asking, well, like, what does that mean? What is military affiliated? And then a lot of them say, like, I've never met a veteran. I've never met an active duty person. Maybe somebody in my high school went off to the military, but I don't know anything about them. And so there's a big disconnect, and they want to know about who that population is and and then they ask me questions since I'm, teaching the class. They'll be like, so what do you mean? Like, you don't automatically get a job when you move all the time? No, that's like, I'm a spouse. So like, they think we're the VIPs of America, right? And so then they say, don't you all have the best healthcare? Didn't you choose where you got to live? Like, no, I wouldn't have chosen, I can't say what state because some of you may be from that state, but anyway, so I wouldn't have chosen these places. Oh, your husband went to Iraq multiple times for 15 months. Like, didn't he volunteer for that? Like, no. So there's all these misconceptions, right? So these veteran studies courses can really help bridge that gap in education. And sometimes, they feel more comfortable in the classroom asking those questions than they would if they were to just meet a vet in their community. Or it helps them so that then they can bridge that gap and they will be more willing to meet a vet and talk to them in their community. But how that translates into changing policy is those same conversations are being had in the legislature. So we're going to the legislature and we're saying we need these policies passed because we need them to create change for our families now, right? But the legislators also don't know what military benefits are. And so when you're going to them and asking them about changes, they have these misconceptions too of that we have all these education benefits, whether it be for the veteran or for the family member. or that we have different things that we really don't have. Like me in the Central Valley here in California, we have a medical shortage of providers, and now TRICARE is not, they're not covering some of the doctors here because of the reimbursement rate aren't now contracting with TRICARE. So that leaves us with the healthcare gap. But our legislators don't know that because they think we just have the best healthcare system. Like, don't you go to the VA? Like, no, our families can't go to the VA for care. That's for the veterans. So there's a disconnect in terms of education. And I think that veteran studies can help that with our future generation. But for right now, we as a veteran, military affiliated community need to work with our legislature to let them know, educate them, have conversations with them, let them know what our needs are. The bill that I have in the legislature right now in California amends education laws from 1935. So they have not been touched for veteran families. Education benefits from 1935. Some are from 1972. So obviously the population that was these bills were made for, these laws and these support systems were made for, are completely different than what our needs are now in our current population. And so we need to work together to change policy so that we bring it up to date for the needs for now.
Okay. Wow, thank you. That was great. One thing that is really interesting is I actually I'm tossing around a couple ideas right now as we well, actually, let me start with this one. Is when you get back to talking about this so-called Sea of Goodwill, but something that Ben was bringing up is this balance between the thank you for your service and stigmatization, or even stigmatization, but in a positive way. And how even a positive stereotype is still a stereotype, and we get into a lot of problems with that. So as I am trying to buy time in order to formulate a question, what is, well, I was going to try to kill the metaphor of sea of Goodwill, but maybe here's a way to do it. How deep is the Sea of Goodwill? Is this a tide pool? Is this deep ocean? Or if I jump in, am I going to break my neck? Open question for the panel.
I mean, I don't know if I'm just naive, but like, I really think that we are small, but we are mighty. I mean, like just going to the conference, we are what, 60, but we are all studying way different things. Like we are across the board. So if we all, as we are, collectively got together, like we could make some really great change in the Sea of Goodwill, right? I think all of us have, we're all passionate about what we do in many different areas. But it's also a way for us to work together and collaborate. I mean, just leaving the conference, what has it been already, a month? And I've already, had Zoom calls with different people that I met at the conference and thinking like, how can we work together to create change in whatever it is that we're working on? Or I have this expertise. Do you know so-and-so? So that way we connect them to each other. And if we keep on doing that, we can really create an amazing change. And I see different people with hands up, so I'll just wrap there.
Yeah. I want to, but before again, Karen and Carrie and Jeff, do any of the panelists want to chime in first?
I'm going to put Samuel on the spot because I want him to kind of talk a little bit and bridge back into the panel, the work that he did at the conference, just talking about, the tools of measuring how veterans show up or are perceived.
Yeah, I can totally do that. Yeah, because one of my side things too, just in my podcasting efforts, even when I'm outside the academia of veteran studies, is I love analyzing pop culture. And I think if we're using the metaphor, maybe pop culture are little boats on the Sea of Goodwill that some people decide to hop onto, I guess, if we're still using the metaphor.
We're crafting this metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting how you get all of these different versions of veterans in pop culture and how they show up, whether you have the hero archetype One of my favorite metaphors I use, and I used it at the conference, was Captain America, for instance. Like, and when I say Captain America, to clarify it, I mean the Steve Rogers Captain America, not the current Captain America, which actually seems to be an improvement on this particular thing, in my opinion. But he's the essential hero that's up on a pedestal, and you think, oh, that's an amazing soldier right there. He can do no wrong, you know, stuff like that. If you look at the movie version, sure, he had a bad boy moment there for a little bit, but even then it was him standing up for what he believed in, what was right, right? But if you use archetypes like that, to your point of positive stereotypes, it's still a stereotype. And that sort of the hero archetype in particular puts people on this pedestal. And when you put a human being on a pedestal, eventually they fall off. And it can be very damaging when they do fall off, because it puts an expectation on someone that we're human. We cannot follow those expectations, essentially. And I mean, like on the other side of the coin, you have someone like the Punisher, which is the complete archetype of the wounded warrior that does horrible things because of all of his mental wounds and everything like that. So yes, I'm picking on Marvel a little bit here, but I'm trying to pick on the ones that people might know the most, essentially, for the widest swath. But the wounded warrior and the hero are two archetypes that I see frequently showing up in this, along with things like just because a character is a side character doesn't mean you need to not give them depth. So, like, you got that one soldier that, let's be honest, they're probably going to show up, be fodder, and never be in this thing again. You can still give that person a personality that isn't just, oh, I'm going to fight and that's it. You know, things like that. Those are the sorts of things, archetypes and stereotypes, that I commonly see in pop culture. And it's one of the reasons why I made that set of rules. And I am going to put my slides up in the database that everyone is putting their research into. So everyone on this call can look up that database. I'm sure Carrie will give links and stuff like that later whenever all that's solidified. But I made that list because I got tired of seeing all these stereotypes constantly show up. And like, what one of my pursuits is covering a science fiction television show. And once I got into veteran studies, I couldn't unsee it. And that sort of made me make the rules. So yeah, it's interesting how pop culture handles it. And I think pop culture really does make us, as a culture as a whole, see things in certain ways when we don't really realize we're being influenced by it. So that's definitely something that's in the factors.
Great. And I'm going to take moderator's privilege here before I know I said I was going to hand over to Carrie and Jeff. On Samuel's point, there's this tweet from 2017 that I found, here it is. That he used to be in the military is used as screenplay shorthand for badass is proof most Americans don't know anyone in the military. And then one of the replies to it, he was the toughest damn procurement officer you ever saw. No one messed with him on DD Form 250s. No one. But yeah, getting to Samuel's point, yes, badass, but what does that mean in the military? So Carrie, please.
I just wanted to shout out some of the great conversations happening in the chat, and to build on the metaphor to your question, John. Charles and Bridget, I'm going to pass to you for a second if you want to speak to this. But the question that I had when you asked about the depth is, are they different pools? Like, who's in this Sea of Goodwill? If we're imagining it as peer support among veterans, and thinking about identity dimensions, intersectionality, representation internationally, is it all encompassing? Is it, I mean, we talked about, and we're going to talk about the, definition of a veteran, how we see it and how it's changing, but I don't know if Charles or Bridget, you shared some really interesting thoughts in the chat. So I don't know if you wanted to contribute to this idea of the depth and who's included in the Sea of Goodwill.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Well, what I posted had to do with some of the conversations that are happening around DEI and some of the policy and funding changes that are shifting related to these very specific buckets of people, like women, or LGBTQIA, or Black women. And I think sometimes when we get into conversations about the social identities, veterans forget that we are benefiting considerably in many spaces because of our veteran status, and many veterans don't perceive themselves as being a part of DEI in hiring and education and other spaces. And when laws are changed, because I think Carla was talking about the policies, some of the policies going back into the 1930s, some of these policies and the benefits of the veteran status kind of benefited off of changes in policy as it related to gender and Black people. And so now we're in this space and nobody's having the big conversation that when these changes happen, there is an opportunity for changes to happen considerably as they relate to veteran and veteran status, because it has come up previously related to hiring practices. Why do veterans get 10 points to get hired in government when they don't have these experiences and all these other things? And I've even been challenged by some veteran advocates who said, like, why should veteran get to run be the CEO of organizations or get all this money to start organizations when they don't have experience as entrepreneurs? And I'm like, those are great questions for you to speak publicly about, but privately we're not going to have a conversation. We need to, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it in a public discourse so that we can have those conversations. And then the other part of it is really getting people to understand, like, women who served for a long time didn't linguistically, language-wise, in the policy, in documents, in paperwork, weren't included as veteran. They did not have veteran status, and so they might have served. And so we're still kind of like combating some of that. We're making strides, but at the same time, we have another C that is coming along the other side to say, why are we even having that conversation about gender? And so then how might women who serve have a different experience if we're not paying attention to these various, I said archipelago of veteran experience, but that was my title. But really, if we don't begin to have that conversation, because it's important to policy, which it's very important to me, and it's also important to the experience, because experience, sometimes women, sometimes Black women, sometimes disabled women, sometimes disabled veteran, we're not even having a conversation. If we go and even look at how students are enrolling and how many are intersecting with the disability services, but receiving VR&E paid funding to go to school, the numbers are like zero. Like, veterans don't intersect with any type of services that related to disability on campus. And so then that starts to ask some other questions, like, okay, how are you receiving money for funding to go to school for education, but not, and you have a disability because you have a disability and you're not? So there's all of these different, I'm just bringing these things forward because I'm sure that others have done a lot of research. My research is specifically with graduate students experience. So it's not specifically in these other areas, but it intersects with these different areas. So thank you for bringing me into the conversation.
Jeff, you've been patiently waiting. Please.
Thanks. Well, first of all, it was wonderful to join the group. This was my first conference, and I wish I knew about you earlier, for sure. As somebody who's been an advocate for veterans issues for most of my life, to include the first creation of one of the first, if not the first, safe zone for LGBTQ plus warriors before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. So just being associated with you, I was very, very impressed with the presentations I had a chance to see, and thanks for the grant. I was kind of circling back to something Carla said, as in terms of us many few and relating it to the metaphor we have, sort of when the tide rises, all the boats rise, as it were. Um, and I was thinking too that a lot of times in terms of what Sam was talking about and the archetypes of veterans we create through the media, through our popular imagination, through things that are said over and over again. We often lose focus on we focus on the wounded warrior, but we don't think about the returning warrior and the returning warrior's family very much. So I love the idea of shifting what we consider to be the veteran and the focus on what should we focus on. A lot of my work has been on reintegrating warriors to their families, the workplace, and the college, as well as people with trauma backgrounds. So thanks to this group, I got brave enough to talk at a military sexual trauma conference a couple times over the last couple weeks around the country, and then bring a spiritual component into it, which isn't normally my wheelhouse, but I've been really focused on moral injury lately. But all these discussions started to make me think about the idea, especially when Bridget was talking about DEI and not unlike internalized racism, although that's a little bit of a stretch probably when I say this, but the idea of internalized stigma, because there's an interplay between the warrior ethos and help seeking, or even ending the conspiracy of silence around family secrets and warrior families. So these policy changes that we're talking about certainly could eradicate some of that silence, because we enter these spaces too as policymakers and as leaders, and we bring those stigma with us. So I love the idea that you guys can together rally and give us voice to some of these things and describe some things that are very difficult to articulate. And you may not even know that you suffer from some of these things and internalize them.
Have a PlayStation thing on them.
Oops. Finally, I would say that we're a representative sample of the U.S. So all the problems that the U.S. struggles from trickles into our formations and back into our families. And so I just wanted to appreciate a lot of things you're saying really resonate with me, and I'm really excited to be part of this organization.
Okay. Thank you. Annetta, and then please go ahead, and then I want to move on to our next topic.
Yes, hi. I hope you can hear me okay. I really, really very much enjoyed the conference, and I too feel very happy that I was able to hear what you all had to say. So I wanted to just ask Steve Wall about the veteran identity, because that is the focus. I realized when I did my dissertation that there are a lot of veterans out there who don't, they're very quiet, right, about their status. They have a lot of humility. And so now we have some of the Generation Z that are going to be the next generation of veterans. And my concern is that because their deployments, maybe they didn't have any deployments, maybe in a short 4 or 5 years that they've had, their experiences may not have been perceived, by the civilian population as dire and drastic as most of the post 9/11 veterans in the global war and terror. So my concern is that they don't become marginalized, when they enter the veteran status. And I realize a lot of the Generation Z veterans are going to be coming out of the COVID lockdown era in their last 2 years of high school, where they had a lot of stress and potential personal trauma. And a lot of times what happens, and because I am in the mental health field, that, we tend to snowball our experiences, and the signs of the anxiety might not show up initially, but eventually down the road they will. So if these Generation Z veterans are coming out of that personal experience pre-active duty status, and then they have their active duty status, and then they become misunderstood during and after their active duty status, I'm concerned that with the marginalization, their mental health issues might look different, but also be just as profound. And so we need to keep an eye on that and make sure that we are not going to go down that road of marginalizing them because of their lack of deployment experiences or whatever. And they make sure that they get the benefits and everything that the last 20 years the veterans have also had, and respect that they are also veterans in every definition of the word. So that's just a concern that I have, and I'm really glad that Steve is doing or had done his dissertation on the identity of veterans. But what are your thoughts on that as far as the Generation Z veterans going into the workforce in the next few years?
Steve?
Yeah, I could talk to you all day about this. If you're ever in St. Louis, I'll buy you a beer and we'll definitely get into all of it. But a couple of things relating back to your question, but also the Sea of Goodwill. I think that the Sea of Goodwill helps to marginalize people, right, who happen to have joined the military, right? All these things that we're trying to address with the Sea of Goodwill are human problems. It's just we have the social will or cachet to address these people's problems in particular, right? But as Sam points out, right, we've put them on a pedestal, which we think is an act of reverence, but in reality, we are, some intentionally and some unintentionally, right, are saying we're marginalizing you. We're going to put you over here. It's hard to reintegrate anyone while we've set them aside, whether we're venerating them or we are treating them as if they're broken and fragile, right? The other thing is that I don't know. No one in my sample, in my study, was under 30. I can safely say without looking at my notes. No, wait, maybe barely under 30, right? Like late 20s. So I don't know about the next generation. However, I do think that based on this study, right, there is a tacit understanding that there's a hierarchy of military experiences, and we form our assumptions about what goes in, what should be part of the Sea of Goodwill, and how we conceptualize veterans based on that hierarchy of experiences, right? So there are people who joined the military, did a long career, multiple enlistments, whatever, right? And maybe they never got shot at. Maybe they didn't deploy to anywhere, that would get them a campaign medal. But everyone in my study was comparing themselves to somebody else, and not a real somebody else. They were comparing themselves to an archetype of veteran, and none of their experiences were the same as that archetype. So, for example, right, almost everybody basically said, when I asked, what is a veteran? Someone who joined the military, right? And then there might be some caveats to like, did you need to finish basic training? Are you service connected? Whatever. But when I would ask that same person, what makes you a veteran? One participant said, I am ardently not a veteran. I didn't earn that, right? And everyone else said, well, it was when I reenlisted. It's when I deployed to combat. It's when whatever it is, it wasn't the same as whatever they set up for anybody else as the threshold to be a veteran. And I think as warfare changes, our social policy, our view towards veterans shift, that yes, I don't think your concerns are unfounded, that there will be a shift, and we won't realize that shift is occurring until it already has, and some people have fallen through the cracks.
No, that's definitely a good point there. Like, it will change, and we won't know it until after it's happened. And I would add, just as somebody who studies the media created by veterans, this marginalization that Annette is talking about of the Gen Z veterans is going to, be caused by other veterans. Like, it's going to be, like us elder millennial veterans looking down at, the younger veterans. And that's how it has produced before. And I think that's how it's going to be produced again. Okay, I want to turn now to how we're actually studying this and like how we're looking at it in terms of disciplinary and disciplinary methodological terms. And so VSA is intended to be a multi-trans interdisciplinary association. And I want to know is what we're looking at is, how do you see the different connections between different disciplines? But maybe a more pointed way of asking this question. Are we doing veteran studies or are we merely studying veterans? Would any of the panelists like to take that up right now?
I think I'll take a swing at this. So in framing my research, I am looking at veteran studies and not studying veterans because I am not looking individually at the veteran. I'm not putting a cross section over them or a microscope on them and looking at them as individuals. I am looking at how society, particular local government officials, view them and how they attain success or define success of a veteran coming into those roles. And I think that's a great question, John, because there's a lot of, I talked about this kind of in my reflection paper that I wrote, right? Like, it seemed to me before I went to this conference that there were two well-worn wagon wheel ruts for veteran studies, right? Like either you were in like the VA healthcare disability wagon wheel rut, or you were in the post 9/11 GI Bill veterans on campus student experience wagon wheel rut. And like if you said veteran studies to anybody, it fell into like one of those two wheelhouses, right? Like there wasn't much in between. And then coming to the conference, realizing that we are spread out into so many other channels other than just those two very well-worn wagon wheel ruts. And if we aren't conscious of those, we can find ourselves drifting to the themes and the theories that associate to one of those two wagon wheel ruts. And if you do, then the focus becomes much more studying veterans than it does veteran studies. That's my opinion. But it's almost like you get drawn like a magnet, right? When you're consciously outside of a dip in the road, like your wheel's gonna find it if you're not consciously trying to avoid it, right? And I think that could become a challenge or an obstacle for veteran studies as a whole to just not unconsciously be drug into one of those already well beaten paths, and then that we keep regurgitating the same academic works, just with different lenses on them, or have the risk of not expanding to what veterans actually look like in society because we stay on these well-worn paths.
And that's great. And Carla, I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot. That you're so you're coming from an anthropology program. What does ethnography inform? How does ethnography inform the study of veterans or veteran studies?
Well, it's interesting because so I agree with what Ben just said right now, and we need to. I come from an interdisciplinary approach as well, but I just think about how I can introduce it in my classroom. So, I teach specific classes in anthropology. How do I incorporate military into my death and dying class? Identifying human remains, plants, and somehow I figure it out. And so this summer I'm doing a cultural anthropology class and I have to teach ethnography. So to your point, and so what I'm doing is instead of using the books that other faculty at my campus usually use, we always use the same for that specific class. I'm using actually some authors. There's ethnography on, you may have heard of Catherine Letts on Fort Bragg. And so I'm going to be introducing that into my class. So I'm still teaching them ethnography, but I'm teaching them about military ethnography. And so I try to incorporate that into my class, but also in my own research too, I'm looking at federal labor laws, excuse me, and their impact on military spouse unemployment and underemployment. And so incorporating ethnography into those studies and then sharing that, I think can highlight our community and how we can create change or what those needs are, because people are trying to find out, but they just don't have access to them too. I also had people who say, well, I would like to study military families or veterans and their families, but I don't know how to find them, or I don't have access to a military base. And so I think that also is helpful that I have that access because then, you know, it makes it easier to create ethnography. But I really like incorporating that literature in my classroom.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to second Lutz's book. Although one of my favorite veteran ethnographies, but also medical ethnographies, Zoe Wool's After War. It's just and just actually really beautifully written too. You know, like just a great piece of scholarship. But continuing on this, yes, it's just an amazing book. I want to, and I'm glad, Carla, you're mentioning this stuff about childcare and or military spouses, because it was kind of reminding me of Carrie's talk, and one of the things that she was talking about was the issues that military spouses are having with childcare, and it occurs to me. I'm going to riff off of something that Steve said in his talk, where he's making the point, and this is me going to shift, ask the two of them a question. Steve made a point about we don't have a homeless veteran problem, we have a homelessness problem. And I'm going to add to that with what kind of going to what Carrie was saying, is like, we don't have a childcare issue for military spouses. We have a nationwide childcare issue. So if either you could pick that up, is what does studying these problems from a veteran standpoint help with the national problems that we have with homelessness or with childcare? How does looking at the little veteran part of the problem help us understand the wider part of the problem, or the wider problem, I should say.
So I've taught MSW courses specific to our, I think, problematically large umbrella certificate program about military veterans and their families, right? Where a lot of the curriculum is deficit-based. One of the options is take a substance abuse course, a trauma course, right? But I teach the more foundational parts of that certificate program. And what I hope that people leave there with at a minimum is that if you are a helping professional working with the veteran population, you have access to a larger toolbox than most other people do to solve the problems that are presenting in front of you every single day, right? So if you work, I work in St. Louis, and if you go to a community agency who addresses homelessness or does employment like I do, they are going to have a fraction of the resources that I have access to, right? Not only because I work for the second largest government agency in the country, right? I can access a medical record and find your primary care doc and send them a direct message. But when I call and say I work for a large government agency that works with this population, most of the time people will at least return my call. They may not do the things that I hope that they will do, but they'll return my call. But if you're part of a 5-person nonprofit trying to address that same problem, it's going to be very hard to get your foot in the door. It's going to be hard for you to leverage relationships to solve those same human problems. But what I hear a lot when I teach those courses, students are saying, man, we need to do more for veterans. And so I challenge them and ask, what more needs to be done? And basically, I get a bunch of papers at the end of the semester that say, hey, we need to create this new program. And I can cite 5 times that we've tried that program, right? And present that back to them and say, why didn't it work, right? If we have what would be equivalent to unbounded resources to address suicide, homelessness, substance abuse, all those kinds of things, why haven't we ended it in the veteran population, right? So I hope that creating veteran studies as a distinct academic endeavor will help to address that, right? To say, like, look, we have a population where we can get information on how to solve human problems, but we also have to have the motivation to apply it outside this population as well, right? The other thing, to Ben's point, right, is that those wagon wheel ruts exist most likely because of funding, right? Funding is there for deficits. We will fund research into veteran homelessness and substance abuse and those kinds of things. But who's going to fund my kooky ideas about how we define, what a veteran is and if we should, and if there is actually a legal definition of what a veteran is, or are we defining access to benefits, right? Because that's hard for someone to summarize on a stump speech or from in their grant application and those kinds of things, right? So I think I'm coming back to your original question, John, right? We have the opportunity to do this, and I think somebody who does this well is David Albright at the University of Alabama. He studies a lot of, he uses the veteran population to find takeaways and then present that to the wider world to address poverty or whatever other item is under study. Speaking of ethnographies, if anybody's got funding, I would love to go to any of our peer nations, like the ones that Michael just listed in the chat, right, to study places that just have socialized medicine and ask them what it means to be a veteran and how they fund those things or don't fund those things out of the government coffers, right? Or how much social capital there is related to this concept of veteran.
And since we're talking about interdisciplinarity, Albright does a lot of work with one of his UA colleagues, Scott Parrott, doing media studies. And so they're kind of combining a lot of this stuff on stereotypes, a lot of these things we were already talking about. And since I had flagged Carrie, do you want to add anything to this?
Well, I'm seeing that we're at the hour, and I also think, what else could I say that would follow that great conversation we had for an hour, but also everything Steve was saying about veteran studies versus studying veterans. All I am taking away from this is that we need to do this more often. We need to have more conversations. We need to gather more often. We need to elevate more voices in the space. And I'm seeing really interesting thoughts in chats that I want to follow up on. So I don't have anything more to say from my perspective other than just thank you to everyone that shared. I'll pass it over to John for the last word, but please stay connected with us so we can do more of this.
Yeah. Well, I actually, Carrie, real quick, like, do you have to go? Since you're, I mean, I have another like half hour. And so if you can, keep the Zoom thing open, can still chat for a moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I've passed you co-host. I have to bounce to another meeting.
Oh, okay.
Space is welcome to continue sharing. And I also want to shout out one more time our survey that we have about the conference so that we can create more of these spaces for sharing. But yes, please stay on, stay engaged, continue discussing and connect with each other on LinkedIn.
Can you drop that link again?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, Carrie is going to drop that link in the chat. Please fill out that survey. Because we need to know what's what's working and what's not working. Like I said, like I can stick around for another half hour if anyone wants to continue this conversation. But this has been really interesting. We already lost one of our panelists. He had to go. So we still have Sam and Carla. I guess Steve already went. But I want to say that Sam, Carla, that before. Oh, okay, we lost Carla. Sam, do you have anything you'd like to say before you head out?
I put it in the chat, but if anyone knows any contacts or anything, I'm